I'm Jamie Adams, and I've been having fun in the sun.
I'm Ian McAllister, and I like to ride my bicycle.
And my name's Ross, and I don't know where I am. This is Brainwaves, bringing you the best in board game and tabletop gaming news. These are the headlines for the week of the 29th of April 2019. Kickstarter clamps down in a colossal fashion. Think hard about the Mensa Select Awards. And none of us won any Golden Geeks.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody. Before we start with the headlines, we'd just like to give a big welcome to Ross from More Games Please, who will be joining us as our first roving reporter.
It's an absolute pleasure to be on the show. So for those who don't know what More Games Please is, yes, it is a description of how we all collect within the hobby, but it's also a website where I interview board game artists to get a closer look at their art. I also have an Instagram account where I cover what I'm playing and also more of a kind of look at the games that I have my eye on and I've tried, not necessarily own.
Yeah, and there's some beautiful photos on there. We will link to Ross's social media accounts in the show notes.
Ross is the first of many guests who are going to be joining us in the Brainwave studio and helping us out while Sam is away meddling with the space-time continuum and doing whatever he can. Back to the podcast.
So our first headline this week is a little bit of an odd one. Over the last few days, a situation has been developing in the world of Kickstarter. It seems that Kickstarter has been clamping down on Kollosal Games Kickstarters. It started with them cancelling Hunt the Ravager as it started its campaign. They have also cancelled Folding Space, which is from Maple Games, and we'll come back to why that's significant in a second. And they have also cancelled Papillon, which was another Kollosal game, after it had completed and finished funding. Now, it seems to be that that what has happened is that Kollosal Games have been trying to produce multiple Kickstarters through multiple different accounts. Kollosal Micro was Hunt the Ravager, the Kollosal main account was doing the Papillon one, and Maple Games was doing Folding Space. Now, Maple Games has a connection to Kollosal in that Tanguy Vincent Serra is the director of Maple Games and also the chairman of Kollosal Games. So there's a lot of connected stuff going on there with the same people basically running multiple Kickstarters at once. Kickstarter has got rules about this kind of thing, about running concurrent Kickstarters. You're not meant to. They've been a little bit odd about enforcing their own rules in the past, but they seem to have really come down hard on this one. Maple Games also dismissed its president, Daryl Andrews, on the April the 16th. We're not quite sure what that's about at this point. There's been a statement basically saying I'm still one of the founders, but I have left as a director. As the president. This message was sent out to backers of Papillon. So this is a message from Kickstarter's Trust and Safety team. We're writing to let you know that a project you recently backed has been suspended. We also want to assure you that your pledge has been cancelled. To protect the community, we may suspend projects when they demonstrate one or more of the following. And they go on to list a bunch of different possibilities of a Kickstarter being suspended. We take the integrity of the Kickstarter system very seriously. We only suspend projects when we find strong evidence that they're misrepresenting themselves or otherwise violating the letter or spirit of Kickstarter's rules. We know this isn't ideal, but we do sincerely hope to see you again backing one or more of the amazing projects, etc., etc. There has been a statement from Travis Chance, who's one of the directors of Kollosal Games. This Wednesday, I'll paraphrase this a little bit. This Wednesday, you helped us back Papillon from Kollosal Games, designed by JB Howell, an illustration by Whitney Rader. It's an excellent game, etc. Unfortunately, we've been notified by Kickstarter the campaign was suspended and our backer pledges have been cancelled or refunded. Now, this was after the Kickstarter had finished, and the Kollosal team is currently working to understand these issues and hope to resolve the situation very soon. What do we think about this, guys?
Yeah, so for me personally, it's one of those things that when it's a new company you've never heard of and they release a number of Kickstarters or they run a number of Kickstarters concurrently, it's troubling, and it's one of those things that from a community standpoint, and there's a piece of news a little later that we'll get to which highlights why something like this can be a concern. No spoilers, but it's one of those things where if you allow companies as a rule, to run multiple campaigns through multiple Kickstarter platforms, accounts, yeah, exactly. Then it sets a bad precedent. It's strange that this is the only account or only series of accounts that I'm aware of where this has been a thing. However, it's also one of the few companies that I'm aware of that have multiple accounts, that have connected employees or connected owners that are running concurrent campaigns. So it's a very unusual situation, and maybe they're just making an example of them in this regard to kind of send a message.
It's a weird one because like a lot of people are saying like, well, what about Common Minis, for instance? I mean, they run a lot of Kickstarter campaigns, one after another, but they've mostly funded most of their stuff, and it's mostly got to backers.
Who's this?
But I think the thing that Simon.
Cool Mini or not for ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying like, oh, if you're going to do Kollosal Games, then why not do Cool Mini or not as well? And I think that the difference here is, like Ross was saying, is they've obviously tried to have multiple accounts, including one that isn't even under the Kollosal name. Also,
Cool Mini or Not are in various stages of fulfillment of their various projects, where a lot of these were successfully funded, and there was either no communication or there was a lack of it, and it was just repeating one after the other.
We'll certainly bring you more on this as the situation develops. Like we say, this is very new at the time of recording. By the time the cast goes out, we might have more information, and I'll drop in a wee breaking news if that is the case.
All right, so next up we've got the Mensa Select Award. Mensa, known as the society where they are smarter than you, and they also want you to know that. So every year they have a list of games that they choose after over 40 hours of play. There's a big group of them that get together, and they'll play a series of games over a 40-plus hour board gaming judging marathon, where they give something the coveted, their words not mine, Mensa Select seal of approval. And it's 300 of the country's most avid board gaming fans who happen to be Mensa members that are part of that judging panel. So the games that have been selected on the list are Architects of West Kingdom by Renegade Games Studios. We've got Gizmos from Simon Inc. We've got Gunkimono from Renegade Games Studios, Planet from Blue Orange Games, and Victorian Masterminds, again from Simon. So that's three publishers that have, cleaned up, two of which have 4 of the 5 games. It makes me curious how large the pool of games was they were working from, if they managed to pick 4 of their 5 winners from only 2 publishers. That could be coincidental, but it does make me raise questions about the selection process.
I didn't think Victorian Masterminds was even out in full retail yet. I thought I might be wrong on that. I need to check on that.
I
agree. Like, it would be interesting to see what the selection process was. I mean, there's so many games come out every year. Like, just on the last cast, we were talking about the number of games that come out in the brainstorm section. It was like something like 3,000 last year. So how do you even begin to parse that selection down to like that many games?
But how do we look at this? And the people who are taking part in it, the judges. Yes, it's 40 plus hours, but each judge has to play up to 30 games from start to finish and complete and submit a comment card for each game played, each time it's played, which that wording leads one to assume that they're playing 30 games from start to finish multiple times, which they should, because you can't play a game only once and have a fully formed opinion of it, especially if you're wanting to hand out awards.
Well, we are talking about the Mensa people here, so you're giving it average mind rules. These are the creme de la creme. No. Their words, not mine.
They can play Twilight. They can play a whole game of Twilight Imperium in only an hour.
They're playing 30 games at the same time.
Oh,
yeah.
And I mean, they're scoring in aesthetics, originality, play value, play appeal, and quality of instructions.
Yeah, I mean, we might mock the process a little bit, but it is good to see any sort of advertising for the board game hobby outside of the hobby itself. And Mensa is a well-respected organization from a lot of people's point of view, so them highlighting a few board games isn't harmful. Though I do agree with Ross that I'd be interested to see what the selection process actually was.
I also think it's great for any wider organizations to take an interest in the tabletop community and what we're doing. And to be fair, there's probably a pretty rigorous thing in place. I'll poke fun at it because I feel like I can, but like you say, it's nice. It's nice to see. It's just obviously, a little bit more visibility might be useful.
Yeah.
And sticking with awards, awards season is rolling around again and it keeps on going. The 13th annual Golden Geek Awards have been announced recently. And the Golden Geek Awards are voted on by the users of the Board Game Statistics website and overlord of all, Board Game Geek. There were 16 categories this year, and favourites of the year, Root and The Mind came away with the most amount of wins. The Mind scooped Best Card Game, Best Cooperative Game, and Best Party Game. And Root came away with Most Innovative Game, Most Thematic Game, Award for Artwork and Presentation, and the coveted Board Game of the Year. Interesting to note that the Golden Geek Awards also include a print and play category and also a board game app. That is one that is transferred over to an app, not app integrated. There's also a podcast category, and your favourite podcast didn't win, weren't even nominated. It's, nice to be thought of, but we can get past it, we're mature. It's also worth noting that the Brainwave's favourite, Keyforge, won the two-player game category.
Seems well deserved. What do you think of the artwork and presentation category, Ross? Do you think Root deserved to win that?
I really can't argue with that. It didn't win the award on my website. So all the listeners out there, I also had my award was first, by the way. Anyway, that's splitting hairs. No, so there was there's a best. I did a best board game art of the year vote. It was a public vote, and then it was based on public nominations. And Root came second, and Everdell won my list. So it's interesting to see. It's basically the top two have been reversed for Board Game Geek. So, obviously the general consensus is two very good-looking games with anthropomorphic. I'm glad you're here. Animals that are part of the cast. So is that a particular thing that was just popular? Are those two games thought of in a similar mind, and that's why we saw them? Or is it just a reflection that they're both very good-looking games that happen to come out at a similar time?
Also, the runner-up in the artwork and presentation category, the second runner-up, was Brass Birmingham.
Also on the list on my website.
There you go.
It's a very good-looking game. Don't think it's a game I'll ever play. It's not really my kind of thing, but it's a very good-looking game.
I'd probably give it at least one try. And I think this might cement also in the minds of people who say, The Mind isn't a game. I think you'll find it is, Sunshine.
As far as the users of Board Game Geek are concerned, yep, it's a game.
But that's not saying Board Game Geek is always right. It's a saying, as far as they're concerned, for these awards.
Anyway, on with the news, gentlemen. It's over the last few days, it's come out that Steve Jackson Games are going to be offering refunds after ethical concerns have emerged from them partnering up with Frog God Games. Now, last year, Steve Jackson Games kickstarted the Fantasy Trip, which was one of their old RPGs, had a lot of love amongst the community, and they kickstarted a new version of that. And they are now looking to produce some expansions down the line, and one of the companies they brought on to work with them on that is Frog God Games. Now, there's a member of Frog God Games called Bill Webb. He's one of the founders of the company. He has previously been accused and admitted to sexual harassment at a con. This has obviously incensed some backers that Steve Jackson Games would even consider working with a company that contains an individual like this. There's a statement from Steve Jackson, which I'm going to read verbatim just now. It was in a reply to some questions from the community on this. I have read in its entirety the 2017 EN thread that Chris pointed to. EN World is an RPG website. And I do understand that a number of posters there are incensed at Bill Webb. To me, that does not justify that Steve Jackson Games boycotting a whole company. Some very good things are coming out of our work with Frog God. 3 different projects are underway, and I don't expect them to be the last. If that makes you wish you had not supported our Adventures campaign, we'll work with you to refund your pledge, minus the fees already charged by Kickstarter, Stripe, and BackaKit. Now, this may be the first time that an RPG company has offered refunds due to community concerns, with all the controversy with the Zach S. Controversies earlier in the year that we covered a couple of podcasts back with Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons. There was no offer from those companies to refund people for the products they had bought. What do we think about this, guys? It's quite a tricky subject to talk about because there's a lot of there's a lot of heat out there about it. There's a lot of people who are very incensed about it. I don't fully know what to think myself. What do you guys think?
I think it comes down to, should the actions of one individual tarnish the reputation of the whole company?
Yeah, and probably not. But should Steve Jackson have chosen different people to work with? Were they? It sounds like maybe they weren't aware of the problem beforehand. Should they have been? How much due diligence should a company do? Like, do they need to? Should they vet every single person in the company before working with them? That seems impossible.
I think it's difficult because you don't, from Steve Jackson's perspective, he obviously, or you'd assume it seems like it's something he wasn't aware of. It was just something, a conversation that he wasn't a part of before any decisions were made, and so they've gone to a certain point through the process, and now this is the kind of information that's been revealed to him, which has obviously put him in a very difficult position. With a character like Bill Webb, obviously, I don't know a lot about what went down at the time. However, you've got to have kind of, as much as you don't want it to tarnish a company's reputation and whether or not you can work with them, if he's still a part of that organization and he's still an important part of that organization, you have to question whether or not it's good from any perspective to be seen to be working with him if that's the reputation he brings with him. And what does that say to the community?
Yeah, that's fair. That's a completely fair point. Should Froggle Games have parted company with him before now? And it seems like the answer is almost definitely yes. Why they haven't is something to be found out down the line. And that situation's still developing, so we'll probably cover that more once a bit more information's come out about exactly what's happened. And I think it's good that Steve Jackson are offering refunds to people who don't want to get that product anymore, feel it's been tarnished. But yeah, it's a tricky situation, and we'll hopefully get more information as that situation develops.
Okay, so from a couple of interesting refund/crowdfunding stories, Solar City's Kickstarter has collapsed in a case of actual, genuine, where's my wallet gone? Oh, it's that guy running down the street fraud. Solar City was a game that originally funded with nearly $68,000 for a $15,000 goal on Kickstarter. And back in February, it's just becoming public knowledge now, to the wider public at least, that the CEO has resigned and actually fled the country, which is something don't think I've ever heard of before.
Oh, wow.
I don't think I've ever heard of someone fleeing the country outside of films, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, if you're going to flee, you might just not answer your emails or phone. Leaving the country, that's some real next level stuff going on there.
Well, if you pardon me for bringing up recent political events, but let's say Julian Assange.
Yeah, I mean, he could have found himself into an Ecuadorian embassy probably quite easily with that kind of money. That's not fair. That's not fair to anyone involved.
Yeah, so what's happened around that campaign is that it seems like the rest of the companies sort of picked up the pieces, realised that there are basically a huge number of debts still to pay. Apparently, 1.400 of the game were printed, and then they just vanished. Some of them appeared in Finland at once.
Sorry, at 1.400.
400 units of the game were printed, then disappeared. Some apparently turning up in Finland at one point, mysteriously. The company basically has no means to refund, continue production. Rights for the games returned to the authors. Yeah, the whole thing's just collapsed horribly.
As an aside, do you think whenever you lose any of your board game components, they just show up in Finland? Is that where
maybe where that's where missing components go?
It is now. It is the repository of all components that go missing.
How do some just show up in Finland? I don't really understand. And who found them?
No, nobody knows, but they just know. It's like they just got to go to Finland.
From what I read, like, they showed up on some store somewhere, and the guy would not tell anyone where he got them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that is shady.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the team have got all sorts of legal troubles to deal with. They are incredibly apologetic. We'll put a link to their update in the show notes. They're incredibly apologetic. They're totally devastated. I believe the original authors and designers are going to try and get the game out there at some point. I don't know how that's going to happen or whether it's going to take into account the original backers, But when this kind of thing happens, when someone has genuinely defrauded a bunch of their friends effectively, and been a bit of an ass, try not. I know it's really disappointing to the backers, and we totally sympathise with the backers, but please try not to go after them, because they've had a lot of sort of angry, nasty comments on the Kickstarter, and it doesn't really help very much. I know it's incredibly disappointing, but being angry at the people who are also completely devastated that their company and game have collapsed.
It's not the author's fault that the guy committed fraud.
Yeah, I mean, actual genuine. I followed Kickstarter a lot from its early days because I find it a really interesting platform. I followed it through a lot of the early tech stuff, and actual genuine fraud is vanishingly rare. Like really, really rare.
I think as well from obviously all the backers will think that they've been defrauded as well. But
absolutely.
If you take it for what's happened, if the way it's been laid out is true, which obviously we don't know, but if what we're told is true, that the CEO has just cut and run with a whole bunch of money, sure, you may have not been supplied with the product yourself, but the absolute storm that the people involved in this project are going to be involved in now, legally and financially.
Yeah.
Everyone just needs to give them a minute, and there's been questions of why it took so long for them to publicly announce it. And if you think they've got to try and get all their ducks in a row to a certain extent, if that many people, nearly 1,000 people, are going to be told, hey, guess what, you're probably not going to be getting anything anytime soon, then the fallout from that is going to be pretty massive. And so it's no wonder that they've taken a little while to try and figure out how to unpick this, and from a legal angle and from all of the different angles I can think of.
And now we go over to our financial correspondent, Iain McAllister, with the Brainwaves Financial Report.
Yep, there's a lot of financial news coming out of the hobby, so we're going to romp through this because a little of it's a bit dry, but we'll maybe have a wee chat about it as well. GW is first up. They have recently announced their profit predictions for 2019. They're predicting a profit of 80 million in 2019, up from 74.5 million in the last year. This is a bit of a change of tone from them. They were, in October 2018, they were warned that UK trading conditions, Brexit, could affect profits, but that seems to have been unfounded for them. It seems that new licensing revenue has helped. They've been licensing a lot of their games to a lot of new companies, and shareholders are also going to be getting a dividend as well. So, yeah, looks good for GW.
My thoughts on that very quickly is, yes, their initial forecast from October 2018, that was when we assumed that the change in UK trading conditions was going to be much sooner than it has since turned out to be. So, time will tell.
Yeah. Also, in the last couple of days, ICV2 have put together their hobby game sales in the US and Canada stats. This is a bit of an estimate from ICV2. They tend to interview different people in the industry to get an idea of how well those companies are doing. So they're estimating that the total industry of hobby games took $1.495 billion in 2018, which is down 3% versus a year ago. That decline is mostly being driven by a 14% decline in collectible games. Now, collectible games include sort of cards, minis, dice, collectible games. The rest of the hobby game market finances are made up of miniatures, non-collectible, board games, card dice games, and role-playing games. A couple of interesting stats that we can see. There's a pro version of this information that we can't get access to because we don't pay for ICV2. If you do, there might be a lot more information to find out. But board games are up 7% to 370 million from 345 million, so they are definitely on the rise. And RPGs are one of the most significant categories. They're up 18%. Now, they're still quite small. They're only taking $65 million compared to board games, but that's up from 55 million the year before. So, yeah, hobbies on the rise, definitely. The collectible side of it, less so. But I think people are much more wary about that kind of game, really. And I do wonder if that affects something like Magic the Gathering. If Magic the Gathering is a large part of that decline, it'd be interesting to see Wizards' results when those come out.
I think one thing to be said about that is it might just reflect where the growth in the market is. The growth is bringing a lot of new people into the industry, bringing a lot of new people into the hobby. That's going up. Maybe long-standing members of the hobby that spent a lot of their money on these longer-running series, maybe that is in decline.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like sort of the hardcore that collect a lot of games are not the major part. I mean, like as a few people have pointed out over the last year or so. Like, there's a huge untapped market out there for a lot of games that we just don't see. Like, the board game geek population is not all of board gaming or card gaming by a long shot, and appealing to a more casual market, to a wider market, is going to see you get a lot more people on board, and that can only be a good thing for the hobby in the end. And finally, on the financial news, Kickstarter has broken $1 billion with its games category. Now, this covers both tabletop games and computer games. 3.2 million people have pledged money to almost 17,000 game-related products since 2009. And amazingly, 69% of this is tabletop games. That's 686 million compared to video games taking 236 million. The rest covers playing cards, gaming hardware, mobile games, and live games, which I presume is things like organized LARPs and that kind of thing. I know
LARPs and mega games, possibly.
Yeah, LARPs and mega games. I know the Harry Potter sort of style wizard school in Poland was funded through Kickstarter, so I assume it would cover that kind of thing. But yeah, that's just an astounding amount of money, and the fact that tabletop games is significantly larger than video games is quite astonishing, really.
The question of the day is, how much does art matter to a game? There are obviously a lot of factors that go into making a great game, but increasingly we're seeing games that look and feel better components, better graphic design, and better art. And does this trend leave great games with less good art, or mediocre art, if you will, on the sidelines?
Well, what do you think about this, Ross? I mean, you're the art critic amongst us.
We bow down to your superior knowledge.
You've recently run that competition to or public vote to show the best art. Do you think the games can still get away with like having more interesting or mediocre art? Like, there was a lot of, like, one of my favorite games of the last year was Escape the Dark Castle. A lot of people didn't like the art in that because it harked back to that sort of fighting fantasy 80s kind of aesthetic, which is a very particular aesthetic, but a lot of people didn't like that. Is that just an aesthetic thing, or could that art just be better? Or
so, Escape the Dark Castle is an example of a very intentional art style. So the art style, it's kind of, it's divisive. So some people didn't get on with it very much, but it was intentionally that scratchy, scrawly fighting fantasy kind of flicking through a book kind of illustrative style, and I personally liked that. I think something that people need to be aware of. For me personally, I don't buy games, and this is a strange thing for me to say, but it's true. I don't buy games just because the art's good. Fundamentally, you have to play it, and you'll never get away from the fact that a play is a huge part of it. However, in an era where crowdfunding has become such a big thing, like we've just covered in the financial news, when you go side by side or toe to toe, your game looks ugly, another game looks good, you're both doing similar things. Who's going to come out on top? I think we know the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's that sort of like the first bite is with the eye kind of thing. That look of, like, if you're a small indie publisher with like just a sort of very basic prototype, then and you're beside Seaborn at a con, then obviously they're going to get all the people coming to their stand because they're a massive company with cool art.
I think just... Oh, go on. Sorry, Jamie.
I was going to say, I just think there's also a possibility of maybe slightly older games with maybe slightly less, let's say, snappy art, maybe being slightly sidelined. I mean, I've kind of said, and little spoiler for anyone who wants to listen to the Idle Thoughts podcast, which is free to all our Patreon backers. Why don't you go and support us on Patreon, you wonderful, wonderful people? But I initially saw the game Las Vegas by Rudiger Dorn, and I looked at the art from the Ravensburger edition and went, that game doesn't interest me. And I think I went because it looks slightly older and I'm not sure if it's the kind of thing I like. And then I sat down and actually played the game and went, this is a fantastic wee game. So I know I'm guilty of it, at least. But then also word of mouth is so important, and one that springs to mind immediately is Ethnos, which is a game that has received a lot of praise from various corners of the board game community, but they've also gone, overall, it is not a visually appealing game.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I remember in the early days when I was getting into the hobby of cheap-ass games, and they would put out basically little sort of A5 packets, which were the game, and it was fairly sort of thin card. The art was pretty basic on a lot of the stuff. The art was of a particular style again. But like all the components didn't feel very nice, but there were games in there, and they were only like sort of 5-10 quid. And I just don't know if you could get away with that kind of production anymore at all. Like, would that just disappear into a bin, or would there still be a place for that kind of sort of something that looks very homemade almost?
Here are my thoughts on it in like a broad strokes kind of thing. So obviously, we can't deny there's a lot of games that come out every year. It's a really competitive marketplace now in terms of board game releases. So looking good's going to help you stand out from the crowd. However, the more time and money you put into graphic design and artwork and components, the more expensive a product's going to become. And what happens is you get a marketplace with more expensive games, and we've seen that across the board with board game releases. Board games are getting more expensive, and it's an entertainment industry, so there's a large part of the argument that there's a market for it. This is what people want. But then you look at something like cheap ass games, and you look at games that have lower production quality, lower quality components, and I still think there's a place for that, but it gets harder for them to stand out and to be recognised because you've got all these flashy games coming out that have incredible art on the cover, but I would say there's a good example of an older game, and Jamie said he played an older game, and you can breathe new life into older games by giving them a fresh coat of paint. So Osprey Games, for example, did an excellent job with High Society, which was a game that originally came out in the mid-90s that everyone had pretty much forgotten about. And they gave it a new release with Art Nouveau, art by someone called Medusa Dollmaker, and I think that's only about 15 quid. And, for a small box card game, it's not going to cost you the world, but they did such an incredible job with the art. Everyone was raving about that game. Everyone was talking about that game again. And that's a prime example of what difference art can make to like raising the profile of something. But I, as much as I love art and graphic design and it elevates the product massively, I do also understand that you're pricing so many people out of the community and the industry because not everyone's got that kind of money to throw at games.
Yeah, we often forget, because we're all hobbyists on this cast, and most of our guests will be as well, is that board games are effectively a luxury product. And they are, as you say, they are getting more and more luxury, especially with Kickstarter. We are seeing games hit stratospheric amounts of money. I mean, you and I both own Gloomhaven, Ross. And, that is an expensive game. And the art in that, even the art on that is quite divisive. I mean, I quite like it, but it's quite sort of brown and red, and it is, like, for some people that's not an attractive game. For others it is. It's a good point on High Society, like giving old games a new lick of paint is a really good way to bring back old designs that were really popular at a particular time people have maybe forgotten about, and just breathing new life into them.
The raison d'etre of restoration games, pretty much. Rob Davio's company taking old games and restoring them with games like Downforce and Fireball Island. Yeah,
and that it's definitely a good way to do that. Yeah, I do wonder if you could get away with something like Cheap Ass still. I don't know you could really. Like you say, it'd be hard to stand out in that crowd of games that come out every year.
I'm really torn on it because as much as I love games to look good, I know what that means and I know what that costs. And when you get so many different people involved in the production of something and so many talented people, skilled people, how do you still maintain a low price point? If you're only printing a certain number of copies, and most games will only really have one print run probably, and so how do you justify getting these incredibly talented illustrators in graphic designers, flashbox art, all that kind of stuff? How do you put that into a low price point without passing it on to the consumer?
Yeah, I think that's maybe a question for another time.
Yeah, it's a big question.
It is a big question, yeah.
Largely, we agree that we like games to look good, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Fundamentally, we've got to join an experience. I think with board game art, this is what I always come back to with any of it, good graphic design and good art help marry the theme to the mechanics. So it helps like when you go back and you play an old video game, it's a bit jarring for the first couple of minutes, but if the game's still good, You're still going to have a good time. So it's the initial response that you'll have to it might be a bit like, oh, it hurts my eyes. But then, you know, if it's a good game, it's a good game. You can play games with a deck of cards. You can have a great night. So,
well, it's that time of the podcast again where we're going to look for Monopoly news. And oh wait, what's that I see glowing above the horizon? Oh yes, it's a brand.
No.
Oh. Yes, keep going. This is beautiful. We have more Monopoly news. Oh, I know people will be happy about this. And in keeping with the soon to be released Lion King remake by Jon Favreau from Disney, we have Lion King Monopoly announced. I've never had a backing for this. This is wonderful. Thank you, Ross. But oh yes, we have Lion King Monopoly coming out, where you'll be able to play as a shiny golden figure of Simba, Nala, Mufasa, Scar, Timon, or indeed Pumbaa. Oh yes, chance and community cards are instead replaced by destiny cards. Utilities are herds of rhino, elephant, antelope, and wildebeest. I shouldn't mean stations. And how could you get even better? Well, I can tell you how it's going to get even better. There is a musical soundtrack to accompany the game. In the same way as the Game of Thrones Monopoly had a card holder that played the Game of Thrones theme, there's a plastic Pride Rock where you store cards, and it'll play the Circle of Life whenever you play it.
At all. Oh no!
Wow.
Yes. Oh. Yes. The 25th anniversary of
Does it
Lion
also project
King.
A picture of or a video of Elton John onto your wall singing Circle of Life?
Do you know what? I think that's going to be in the deluxe
really
edition.
The deluxe edition, Elton John personally comes
holographic
around and
Elton
the game
John
to you.
Oof. But it will release in America, Monopoly the Lion King edition that is, will release on April the 22nd. So it'll already be out by the time this cast comes out.
Alongside the new, slightly creepy CGI film.
Yes.
It's live
and
action.
It'll
It's not, because it's still animated, but just animated
in a
different
because
way.
there's nobody live. And it should be going to it'll be going to Walmart in April 22nd in America, and other retailers will get it probably from June onward. So if you're in the UK, watch this space. If you're in America, other stores that sell board games are available.
Well, I think that's just about all we have time for on this episode of Brainwaves. But before we go, we'd just like to give a big shout out to our executive producers, the Lucky Sparrow Gaming Cafe. And if you would like to join them in being executive producers on the show, then you can join our Patreon. For only $1 a month, you'll get an extended version of this cast, and this particular one's going to be very extended. And for $2 a month, Ross and Jamie talked a lot, has to be said.
Don't apologise. Don't apologise. You and I were the waffle masters.
For $2 a month, you'll get access to our Idle Thoughts podcast, which is myself, Jamie, and one of our guests. In this case, it's Ross, talking about the games we have played recently. And for $5 a month, you become an executive producer, which gives you all those benefits and other stuff if and when we get around to making things. So we've been giving badges and merch and that kind of thing out to our executive producers so far. And you'll also get a podcast shout out every podcast we do. Ross, where can people find you on the internet of things?
Well, if you are so inclined and you're interested in reading more, not about my opinions, but about board game art itself. So on my website, moregamesplease.com, that's moregamesplease.com, I've interviewed over 50 different illustrators from the board game industry, just talking about how they got into board game illustration, the different processes, what they've done, the challenges they've faced, all these different amazing projects they've worked on. And I've had most of the biggest names in the industry, so you should go check that out. Or if you like strictly just pictures without those pesky words getting in the way, you can follow me on Instagram, where I take photos of things and sometimes make them look real nice.
He does indeed make them look real nice. Well, thanks very much for listening, everyone. If you like what you've listened to, then the best way to help us out is to share the podcast and drop us a review and rating on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at The Giant Brain, Instagram Giant Brain UK. Our Facebook is just The Giant Brain. Website is giantbrain.co.uk, and you can get in touch with us about anything on the show through our email, which is giantbrainuk@gmail.com. We'd like to thank Ross very much for coming along and joining us on the show. Thank you very much, Ross. It's very good of you.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great fun. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.